Ojo porque se marcha bien Bermejo que puede golpear, lleva la centro de Bermejo.
New club, new country, new tactic. Same results. I should probably cover just how we got here and why I'm currently in love with the Raumdeuter. It starts with taking a look at the squad I inherited, a mid-table team whose performances were in fact deserving of a relegation battle. Zaragoza outperformed their XG and XG against and ended up finishing 8 places higher than expected. Paradoxically, they were decent in possession, yet amongst the worst in pass completion. Chance creation was a real issue, finishing rock bottom of the league. Now what is done. We're coming with a different approach and will expect different results, but it's good to be aware of the strengths, or in this case, many weaknesses, when assessing the players. We also want to do this through the lens of our tactic. This is the tactic we use most of the time with Peyote. I do not expect this will be what we're using here, but it's a good chance to re-familiarise with what it is we're trying to do. In possession, the libero steps into midfield and the wingbacks push forward, creating a 2-3-5 shape. There are some core components here that we must stick to. Firstly, we are looking to form a midfield diamond. Football is fluid, and so there will be times it might end up looking like a box or rhombus or any other kind of sexy trapezoid. Regardless, the setup will be a player at the base who recycles, a player at the tip, just the tip, who creates, and 2 players who run around trying to look busy. Up front, we have 2 goal scorers who look to run the channels. We play high tempo, short passing, and narrow. These things are immutable, but the rest is up for debate: positions, roles, etc. We have a shape and style we are looking to achieve, but how we do that is adaptable. What we do know, however, is that in possession there are certain functions that players will need to perform. Broadly, these are: recycle, players who can provide a deep outlet and keep the ball moving, whilst providing defensive cover in transition. Float, players who will drift into space to support the attacking unit and occasionally join it themselves. Stretch, players who will occupy wide spaces to stretch the opposition back line, and maybe even send in a cross or 2. Create, players who will dazzle and amaze as they single-handedly tear teams apart. And score, players who will score. I probably didn't need to explain that one. When we assess the squad, it's these functions we're going to be considering. What tasks can each player perform within our setup? Some might be capable of doing many, others, none. Now we also need to do the same for the defensive side of the game. Out of possession, after an initial counter-press, we drop into a low block. We look to funnel into central areas and harass like crazy. Opposition attacking midfielders are targets for press, and you can see why here. When the ball goes into them, we've got a lot of bodies around to converge. This is also why a back 5 is non-negotiable. When an attacking midfielder receives the ball between the lines, that means our defensive midfielders are behind the play. If a defender steps up to engage, we still have players to cover. Let's look at this in some form of 4-5-1 shape instead. In this situation, when the attacking midfielder receives the ball, a defender steps up, and now there's a lot of space to exploit. Whether it might be a striker or an inverted forward, we are potentially putting our covering defenders in an unfavourable foot race. So what are the functions we are looking for out of possession? Box defend, players who will compete for aerial duels, make interceptions and clear the lines. ISO defend, players who will often find themselves isolated against wingers, so will need to be quick and able to win tackles. Disrupt, players that will need to engage and win their ground duels. Funnel, players who will harass and send the opposition inside. And Pretty Boy, players who will take a moment to rest and fix their hair, waiting for us to win back the ball when, if the opportunity arises, they might need to be an outlet for a counter-attack. It's a lot to consider, so let's go through the process with a few of the key players, starting with the incumbent vice-captain, Francho. Francho played as a DM last season, where he registered 6 goal contributions and a 6.84 average rating. Solid, if unspectacular. We can see from his pizza chart that he was very good at regaining and retaining possession, and whilst his tackle success rate was a little on the low side, he was very active in this regard. He was also impressive at creating chances. Let's look at his attributes and a quick reminder of the ranges. Big and gold is excellent, 16 or above. Francho's off the ball movement is elite, and this is obviously something to like, as is his stamina. Medium and pink is good, between 11 and 15. Most of Francho's attributes fall in this range, and that's what we would expect from a midfielder. He is capable in pretty much every phase of play, with a couple of exceptions. Small and red is average, between 6 and 10. We can see that Francho is not especially gifted at doing the unexpected, nor does he have much of an aerial presence. Minuscule and dark red is low, 5 or below. Francho has no attributes in this range. His traits are odd. Gets forward whenever possible is fine, but stops play seems a little contradictory, and is something we'll probably look to unlearn at the earliest opportunity. All considered, Francho is a good fit for the float role. His desire to get forward excludes him from the recycle role, his low flair excludes him from the create role, and his poor crossing excludes him from the stretch role. Nice and easy. Out of possession, we're looking at someone who will disrupt. He doesn't have the physical profile to be a box defender. His attributes suggest he could be a capable ISO defender, but his 72% tackle success rate means we probably wouldn't want to consider this as his primary position. He could also funnel, but we'd be missing out on his ability to regain possession. Alejandro Frances has been identified by the game as our key player. The 22-year-old can play at centre-back, but was used exclusively at right-back. He was good at regaining possession, he was good at progressing the ball, and despite standing under 6 foot tall, he was good in the air. Attribute-wise, he is sufficient at all things defending. He is comfortable on the ball, although doesn't really have the movement or ball-carrying skills to impact play high up the pitch. He is pretty much only able to aid in the recycle role. His tendency to not dive into tackles is something I consider to be quite neutral. It is good in so much as he will show patience in making his challenges, ensuring he waits until the opportunity is right. It is bad in that sometimes this means he won't make the difficult, low-chance tackles that might be necessary. He could perform the disrupt role, but I'd rather that only be an emergency, whilst he is more suited to the box defender or ISO defender functions. Let's look at one more player in detail, Jeannot Montserrat.
Yes, it's a small island in the Caribbean.
What?
You asked if I know Montserrat.
Montserrat was the team's top scorer with 13 goals from attacking midfield, 4 of which were penalties. He's an exciting youngster in real life who was snapped up by Atletico Madrid in January. He is something of an enigma here though. Excluding penalties, he massively outperformed his XG and was surprisingly active in winning back possession. He was under the 50th percentile though in expected assists and dribbles, despite having elite flair and dribbling. It is difficult to know whether this is him not performing to his ability or him being underutilized by the previous regime. So even though his attributes suggest he should be a good candidate for the create role, his performances don't. Instead, we'll consider him initially as a goal threat. Out of possession, his low work rate and determination makes him a pretty boy. Now I normally work through this process in my head, but for the sake of the video, let's put together a matrix to make visualizing it a little easier. Like so. As we go through the squad, we can chart each player and eventually get a fuller understanding of what we have to work with. In the interest of time, however, I'll go through the rest in a more abridged manner. Gaëtan Poussin is our number 1, by virtue of being our only senior keeper. The baby rooster is a good shot stopper, safe on the ball, but not very active in sweeping. Hugo Barachina was good in the air, safe on the ball, but his technical ability scares the hell out of me. He's slow off the mark too. He's also only 18, and so has plenty of time to develop. Adrian Biamonte didn't play, but he has a very similar attribute profile to Barachina. He's not 18, however, and so is probably destined for the bin. Cavaselli brings some experience to our backline. 89% tackle win rate is impressive, and his ability to carry should be helpful for breaking the lines. He is also a little on the slow side. Luis is another defender who is safe in possession, but unlike the last three, isn't slow off the mark. His tendency to dive into tackles should offer a nice counterbalance to Cavaselli and Francis. Marky Moon didn't play much, and when he did, he was rubbish. A wing-back that likes to get forward but doesn't have the talent to do so. Another candidate for the bin. Quentin Leclerc has the right attribute profile for an attacking wing-back, but he still sucked. His willingness to press and tackle could be useful. Adrian Matilva also didn't play much, but did at least do well in terms of expected assists. Rubbish at everything else, mind, and another with some clear technical limitations. Carlos Nieto was Zaragoza's best player last season, with a 7.12 average rating. Good defensive contributions and aided in progression, but little impact further forward. Daniel is 15, and my lawyers have advised me to say that I do not condone child labour. One for the future, but his quickness, ball control and passing makes me think we've got an elite wing-back in waiting. Marc Aguado led the team in assists last season, and his possession metrics are very encouraging. He does appear to have the pace of a man 20 years his senior though. Jaume Grau is not as good as Aguado in possession or in terms of creating, but he was effective at ball progression. Lacks mobility and is preoccupied with stealing the moon. Ilara Mendy played really well in limited minutes, but an injury-prone 35-year-old is unlikely to be someone we can rely upon. Sergio Bermejo spent 4 months out with an Achilles injury, but was okay playing off the right wing. An effective dribbler with elite flair, his lack of creative output is a concern. Daniel Cantero also can't pass, can't cross, and can't shoot. The bin beckons. Marcos Cuenca split time between each wing and did nothing of note on either. He did outscore his XG though, and might be more suited to a role up top. Truth hurts, Lizzo is not good enough. Took plenty of shots, good quality ones too, but clearly lacked the juice. Another for the bin, and it's about damn time. Sergio Beltran did not play enough to judge on performance, but he has elite quickness and is one of very few players that is considered good at crossing. Keen to see what he has to offer. Pau Sanz outscored his XG. That's about all we can say about him. Probably not ready for first team football. Marcos Baselga split his time between striker and right wing, and was okay. Lots of shots but not necessarily of great quality. His poor determination is a concern. A similar story for Sinan Bakis. Shot selection and conversion better than Baselga, but you'd probably want more from a main striker. Finally, Dennis Rufo. Barely played and attribute profile looks a long way away from being ready for the first team. If I'm honest, this is better than I expected, but let's just fade out those that I don't think are good enough, either young players who just aren't good enough yet, or players I want to move on. I think we can start to see the issues now. We don't have many candidates to float. Our only right-footed player who can stretch can't defend as a wing-back, we have no cover at centre-back, and we've got a lot of pretty boys. If we were to apply this to our PAUK tactic, we'd end up with something like this. Which isn't bad, apart from the fact we can't field a full 11. This does give me enough information to consider how we might change the way we're going to set up. So the thought is as follows. We need to form a diamond in midfield, but nothing says it has to be central. With our lack of right wing-backs, we could perhaps look to utilise someone like Francho, but have him invert. We'd then pull Bermejo into a deeper role, and Beltran could come in as a right winger. This would make things a little lopsided, but that would open up opportunities to create overloads. I do have some reservations, however, about Bermejo fulfilling the required defensive duties. Whilst Montserrat isn't any better in this regard, I'm going to drop him deeper as a shadow striker in the hope he then adds an additional body in midfield when out of possession. He will still work the channels and be part of the front line in possession. It's questionable, but it's a starting point for pre-season, and is enough of a plan for us to look at reinforcing the squad. We need 2 left-footed centre-backs, one to displace Cabaselli in the starting lineup and one as a backup. A right-footed hybrid defensive midfielder wing-back so Francho can play more centrally, a left-footed hybrid defensive midfielder wing-back so we can mirror the tactic, which would also then necessitate a more traditional right wing-back. That should help cover what is missing and give us some flexibility in our depth. We have a pretty sizable budget, €3 million and 50k per week spare. What we don't have, however, is a pool to work from. Apparently, the Zaragoza scouting team is only aware of 75 players. That's no problem though. In combination with suggestions from the Director of Football, we should be able to put together a list of targets. I then loaded up a save from the end of last season, resigned from PAOK so I had no unearned additional scouting knowledge, and combed through the candidates' performances. Let me introduce the new recruits. First through the door is Nikos Michalis. The Greek centre-back arrives from Mirandes for a fee of 325k. He didn't play enough minutes last season to really make a judgment, but Michalis was a player already on my radar for my time at PAOK and in the pool of recommendations from our scouts. The season prior, he'd been in good form for Osasuna's reserves. He has the physical stature we are missing and the flexibility to play in midfield. Next in, Jose Antonio Gonzalez on a free transfer. He was a creative machine for Primera Federation outfit Melilla, finishing the season with 12 assists, and is one of the top recommendations from the scouting team. Naturally a central midfielder, Gonzalez is comfortable at left wing-back and comes in to fill that hybrid role. He was followed by former Panathinaikos defender Zeka, a recommendation from our Director of Football. Not to be confused with in real-life Panathinaikos midfielder, Zeka. The former can play both wing-back positions and prove to be reliable on the ball and capable of creating. At 31, he's not a long-term solution, but he gives us quality depth on a free transfer. Gerard Martin is another Director of Football suggestion, arriving for free from Barca's B team. A progressive passer who split his time between centre-back and left-back, Martin is a capable ball winner who should be a good fit for one of the outside roles. Yet another Director of Football gem, Luis Munoz comes in as our hybrid right-back. Naturally a defensive midfielder, Munoz played 33% of his games last season at right-back for Cartagena and is yet another free acquisition. He was very active in regaining possession and showed his ability to get forward and impact the attacking phase. Finally, Noir. A free transfer from Real Valladolid, he was rated highly by our scouts, but didn't make the cut on his performance metrics. Bernat Prados was our first choice, but we evidently weren't his. Cesar de la Hoz was the contingency, but Bordeaux proved more appealing, and so we've compromised. Noir arrived just before the season started, and once fit, should offer depth and mobility in defensive midfield. 6 players in, with only Michalis commanding a fee. There were of course some departures. Adrian Beamonte, Marky Moon, Daniel Cantero and Adrian Liso were all identified as surplus to requirement, and they departed for a combined fee of 190k. We also decided to move on Leclerc for €275,000 to Casa Pia, and Jaume Grau, who was transfer listed when I arrived, moved to Clermont-Ferrand for 1.4 million. And then there was this. Newcastle came sniffing around Montserrat. We rejected. He complained. Understandably, I may add. We graciously agreed to sell him for his release clause, which Newcastle duly met. We're 12 million better off, but down one of our star players. Or not. Newcastle agreed to send him back on loan for the season, so now we have the money, the player, and a whole year to build up a pool of candidates to eventually replace him. We've gone big on flexibility, and that makes it kinda difficult to illustrate squad depth, so hopefully this will work. I've split the pitch in 2. in possession shape up top, out of possession shape below. Out of possession has extra positions as we might line up in different formations. Players have been put into the function/positions that I think are most appropriate. Filled circles are my preferred role for them. If we take Carlos Nieto for example, I believe he is best suited defending at left back. No big revelation there. I'd also be happy with him higher up, pestering on the left wing or inside, disrupting from midfield. His positioning is not good enough for me to be comfortable with him anchoring the midfield, however, or as a box defender. In possession, he is obviously pretty decent for providing width on the left flank, but he is a blank slate when it comes to traits, and so is more than capable inverting, whether that is as part of the diamond or possibly deeper, as he's proven rather good at progressive passing. Now I'll just go through all the new arrivals here, one by one, so we can see just how important they will be in giving us tactical flexibility. Players who can go inside or outside, players who can drop deep or step up. This will allow us to do some funky stuff when it comes to creating our midfield diamond, and also leaves our star players like Montserrat free to play in their best position. Which is as good a time as any to talk about pre-season. We lined up in the tactic outlined earlier as we absolutely demolished one of our affiliates, Stadium Casablanca. Trialist left-back Carlos Romero scored a hat-trick and set up a further 3, and yet that wasn't enough to secure a contract, mainly down to his poor stamina. In a game where we were expectedly ball dominant, it can be difficult to assess defensive structure. By scouring through highlights of opposition passes in our defensive half, I was able to see how we fared with an advanced playmaker in a 2-man midfield. It was not good. Whilst Gonzalez in this example would take up good positions initially, he seemed to think that was the entirety of the job and switch off. A similar situation with a shadow striker, and that's not going to cut it against better teams. So we've had a rethink, and instead of using a libero to form the diamond, we'll go with a more traditional shape, a 3-5-2. This brings an extra man into midfield out of possession. Now this means we have no width on the right, and so I've instructed the advanced forward to stay wider in the hope they will situationally take up that position. A 5-0 win over Logroñez, who are in the division below, followed. Our defensive shape looked more secure. Our diamond looked quite boxy, until you turn it on its axis, and our right side forward was definitely the wider of the two strikers. He was narrower than our advanced playmaker, however, and when we look at where passes were received by Quincer in the first half and Montserrat in the second, we can see very little activity beyond the width of the penalty box. Back to the drawing board. We flipped things to the other side this time. Like with our initial plan, the second striker in the formation doesn't necessarily have to start up front. They need to be a goal-scoring threat, a willing channel runner, and now someone who will provide situational width. Montserrat has high dribbling and flair, and so maybe a wide trequartista is the answer. Against Sabadell, who were relegated from the Segunda Division last season, there were encouraging signs. Montserrat scored and received the ball in wide positions. Quite deep though. He was very involved in play and saw more of the ball than Bermejo, who was deployed as the advanced playmaker. This isn't what we want. In fact, I'd missed an important detail. You see, the trequartista has the move into channels instruction hard-coded when in the AM position. This is not the case in the wide positions. There are only 2 roles that allow that selection, and I'm not looking for a wide target forward. A roundoiter, on the other hand, is perfect. A reminder once again what I'm looking for. A goal scorer that will work the channels and provide situational width. I'm not looking for someone who will take on his man, either to deliver crosses or shoot from distance. I'm not looking for someone who will play defense-splitting passes. Keep it simple, then make a run. Maybe pop up at the far post to give us the lead. We ended up drawing 2-2 with La Liga outfit Cadiz, but our performance was worth more, and I think we've stumbled onto something with the roundoiter. Montserrat received the ball higher up, and whilst there were very few passes received inside, this seemed to be because players weren't spotting the pass. And that has led to my final changes, starting with Sergio Bermejo. His ball control is good. Allegedly. Purely anecdotal, but it felt like a lot of highlights have involved him losing possession due to his first touch. So we're going to swap him with Montserrat. We're also going to switch the defensive midfielder to anchor, as they often appear to push a little too high up in possession. Finally, we're now passing even shorter and playing yet more narrow, which was enough to secure a 1-0 win over Cordoba in our final friendly. The scoreline was somewhat flattering to our Andalusian opponents. And so I think we're settled. Our principal shape will be something like this. There are variations, of course. We have a version for when the opposition fields a front two, and one with a libero for when we need to push for a goal, and one with a libero and 2 regular wingbacks for when it all falls apart and I need to stop trying to be clever. The only thing left is to play our first competitive match against relegation favourites Mirandes. They survived by virtue of head-to-head record last season, yet our board and fans are not confident of our chances. Montserrat's 4th minute penalty did little to improve their outlook. That set the stage for the most obvious development, Nikos Michalis scoring on his debut against his former club. Bermejo doubled our lead after a delightful ball over the top, before picking up a loose ball to rifle in his second. Mirandes responded. I didn't see it, and so I am adamant it didn't happen at all. As far as I'm concerned, Sinan Bacchus' 64th minute strike sealed a 4-0 win, and you can't convince me otherwise. Not just a great result, but a great showcase of what I love about the Raumdeuter. The first goal will get the headlines, as he drifts wide enough to create space before making the run on the defender's blind side. He'd got in behind in a similar manner earlier on in the game too. My favourite highlight, however, is this here. The run comes early, despite Montserrat's body not being in the right position to make the pass. What it has done, however, is clear space. Montserrat is able to break into the hole created and get in across. We can see it again here. Bermejo crashes inside, Montserrat drives on the outside. The missing part of the puzzle is the through ball when Bermejo makes those runs, but that will hopefully come as the players build up familiarity. And that's where we'll leave it. Top of the Segunda Division. See you next time.